Today's stream is all about sound production, and what you just heard was a little preview of one of the techniques we're going to cover. And today is really about justifying the clickbait of this title of the stream, The Secret to Sound Production. I really do think it's a secret, so to speak, because it's not something I hear talked about a lot. Some teachers inevitably talk about it. It is a hallmark of the Franco-Belgian school, but I do think that in many ways it's a lost art, or it's kind of passed down through copying or imitation and isn't explicitly explained. So I'm going to try to do that today. I'm certainly not the only one that's talked about this, but it's something that I came to through a lot of my own experimentation and a lot of frustration with sound production. So I hope you find it helpful. So the plan for today, we have our little schedule here. We're going to talk about something called the waves exercise. Some of you might know this. I've made a video about it a long time ago on YouTube, not in great detail. So the waves is the kind of the fundamental exercise we'll talk about. We'll talk about why we do it and what it means in terms of sound production. We'll start with some open string exercises, which is always a great place to implement these techniques, also going to scales. And we will cover an etude by Léonard, who was a great violinist, the Franco-Belgian school, all but forgotten, wrote some really nice etudes. And then we'll talk about how we can apply this to music, how this tool can be used to enhance our expression. And I'll do a few demonstrations, if I can, of different kinds of music and how this waves idea comes into play. So, sound production. We all know, I think most of us probably know, the three elements of sound production. We have our pressure into the string, created by the index finger and the hand. That's a whole can of worms of how that works. But for all, for today's session, we won't dive too deep into the mechanics of this. I'll just say that pronation is not all that it's cracked up to be. I don't believe that this motion is at the heart of the sound that we make. I believe that there's a lot happening in the fingers and in the hand. And actually that will become very relevant when we do the exercise of the waves. So we have pressure, we have bow speed, and we have sounding point. Those are our three big ones. There are also some secondary kind of parameters, which is, of course, the tilt of the hair, yes, and how straight our bow is, right? We typically want a straight bow, but very often you'll see people pushing out on the down bow. So straight bow is kind of a standard, but it's not always adhered to. You can see many great violinists manipulating that. So that's another parameter for sound production, and there's probably 10 other ones. But we have these kind of main tools. And the problem I often see is that, there are exercises for, okay, how do I practice, different sounding points? Play a scale, and then how do I practice different bow speeds? And we have different bowings for all of that. And I find that this kind of practice can sometimes be very piecemeal. Like we're trying to become little computers. Like, okay, a little more pressure, a little more speed, a little more here, a little more there. I don't think that's how things work in music, and that's not how the body works and the mind. We want patterns. We want something that has an identifiable flavor. So like that particular amount of pressure, speed, angle, everything, that's kind of one idea and has a type of sound. And that, that lives somewhere inside of us and we can call upon it instead of thinking, okay, what's the pressure? What's the speed? Does that make sense? So this exercise, the waves exercise, which I'll talk about in a moment, is meant to integrate these different principles of sound production such that we can start developing these patterns that we use in music making. So it's all about integration. Now, what are the waves exercise? So the waves is basically when you make little indentations with the hand, primarily with the hand and the index finger. It looks like this. So what do you notice? Think about it. What elements am I actually manipulating here? For example, what's the difference between this and this? What do you think? Take a moment to think about it. So the answer is the bow speed. That's one of the main things that we have to pay attention to. When you do the waves, the bow speed does not change. Yeah? And so when I did it, it doesn't change. So it's like this. But you see that I'm pretty, fairly violent with how I'm manipulating the pressure into the stick. So that's, that's the basic Reader's Digest version of the waves, and we'll get into more detail. But what's the point of this, and what does this give us? Well, what we're learning is how the bow reacts to the tension on the string. Right? The tension, it's this kind of, it's not that this is a stable object and we're kind of pushing into it to varying degrees and kind of sawing it back and forth. There's a relationship happening between the bow, the hairs of the bow, and the string, right? There's a pliability here. The string is flexible. And inevitably, when we play, it oscillates, so it has kind of a breadth of movement. And so I feel like there's this relationship between the string and the bow, and it's this kind of pressing back and forth that creates sound. So the waves are a way to manipulate that relationship and to try to figure out what that relationship is, right? And of course, that requires you understand the sounding point, the bow speed, the pressure. All of that is crucial. So we're trying to integrate all three of those things into this feeling of, okay, I have a relationship with the oscillation of the string. So you'll notice that my sounding point is typically a little bit closer to the bridge, because that's where you can actually put in a bit more of the weight of the pressure. So if I did that here, sorry you have to hear that. I'm changing nothing at all except the sounding point. That's how important the sounding point is. Not good. All I do, I move it here. we're manipulating the sounding point. We're manipulating the speed of the bow. We talked about the most important thing with the waves is you do not change the bow speed. Yeah, so it's kind of your arm is flying by as if you're just playing. And we'll do some open string exercises in a moment. But as if you're just playing an open string. And then as you're going, you have this happening. Like you're carving into the string. Little kind of carving motions. And you want to watch your hand float by, and you don't want to see any bumps or any change in the bow speed, essentially. You want to keep it very even. Now, I would avoid the very frog, like the 5-6 inches of the frog area, because that's not really a place where we press with the index finger. That's actually a place where we shift the balance to the pinky, right? There's no need to press because there's a point called the balance point, after which the bow is no longer falling this way, right? If I'm here in the middle and I drop the bow, what's going to happen? It's going to drop this way. Now, if I'm past the balance point, here at the frog, if I let go of the bow, it's not going to go this way. It's going to go that way, right? Because you've crossed the threshold. And the threshold is right here. You know it because you barely have to touch the stick. In fact, if you just let it lay on the string, you can probably balance the bow and let it go momentarily. That's another can of worms about the balance of the bow, but that's something we should always be looking for. So at the frog, we don't need it, so we don't do the waves there. So stop around the balance point. So that's the waves. Now let's do some exercises with it. First thing you want to do is open strings. Recall our little list here. We're going to do some open strings and then apply it to scales, which is really the beginnings of this. Then in the etude, then some music. So with open strings, very simple. Let's do 4 per bow on each string. Now backwards. Show you from this angle here. Maybe this is. A couple things you might notice. One, the indentation, that carving motion, it's extended. It's not kind of a little jab at the string. It's not like this. It's more like da, 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 da. So that the most of the time is spent in the string. So it's like that. So the release is fairly brief. And you can do you can do waves at different speeds. So that was 4 per bow. Let's do 6 per bow. So you can try this on your own now. Just try to listen for the right things here. Very important is that don't be afraid of cracking the sound, right? This is all about trying to figure out what the boundaries are of each parameter of sound production so that we can integrate them, right? You can't figure out your limits by being careful. I think that's a general principle for all violin playing, whether it's technique, whether it's music making. You have to exaggerate. It was Henrik Schering that said, genius and beauty is on the edge of failure. And you really hear that in his playing because he takes the violin right up to the edge sometimes. Just such a mass of sound, but never ugly. And it's right there on the edge that he places himself. So we have to do that. So sometimes you'll get... Honestly, you won't crack the sound very much if the bow speed is consistent and the sounding point doesn't veer off towards the fingerboard. You actually won't crack the sound. You'll get more of a zh in the sound, which is not the worst thing. You actually hear that a lot in great violinists. You know, they get really excited and you kind of hear instead of... kind of zh sound. So you can have that as your limit. So no matter how hard I press, I can't really crack the sound because the momentum is continuing, sounding point is correct. If I do like a slow, this is kind of difficult to do slow waves. So let's say we did only 2 per bow. See, the waves are still very deep. It's not... I'm trying to ride that edge, ride right on the edge of failure. Basically, if you're doing this for like, 10, 15 minutes, you might get a little sore here in your hand, in your forearm, just because you're really working those muscles in a way that you probably wouldn't in any piece of music. So make sure you step back if you feel any pain. It's very probable that you will feel some soreness here, which is okay. But of course, don't play through any pain. Take a little break. It's probably going to be here and down here too. Okay, so I've crossed the limit there. So you can just pull back. You can't get there from the other side. You can't be careful, like a little more, no. Take no prisoners. Okay, so there's other variations we could do on open strings. Fast bows, for example. So if I did 2 or 3 per bow, but with a continually fast bow speed. And just a side note, you want to be watching the string when you do this, because the string will oscillate. If you're doing it right, the string will look really, really broad. I don't know if you could see it here. And we're looking for that broadness every time, as consistently as possible. That's kind of a proxy for, if all of these elements of sound production are integrated, the string will be happy and it'll express itself, And remember, we're doing this and not any adjustments in the bow speed. Okay, so you could do 4, you could do 6, you could do 8. It's a little more difficult. See, if I get to the frog, doesn't work anymore because we're not supposed to press at the frog. Too close to the bridge, you'll get some crack in the sound. Right, so as you put more on one bow, you'll have to kind of change the way you do the waves. Like they can't be as deep, obviously they can't be as long. So that's some open string exercises. Now one more open string exercise, now integrating it kind of back into a basic sound. So we're going to go waves and then normal. One bow of waves, one bow of kind of broad, as beautiful a sound as you can make. So let's say I do 4 notes per bow, waves, and then a sustained tone. Yeah, so when I do that sustained tone, again, I'm looking for the vibration of the string to be constant and wide. So wah, not wah. You'll see if the string is struggling to do this, that means something is going awry. Probably, I think the most common thing is bow speed. Issue in bow speed, that's the momentum. You know, we get so caught up in what's happening here, all these things, we forget that there has to be movement. Movement could be here, it could be here, it doesn't matter. It can be like this. Doesn't matter. Somebody calls Gilles Pop in here. He can demonstrate that. So that's kind of problem solving 101 is check your momentum, your bow speed, the consistency of the motion of the arm. Okay, so that's something I like to do, like waves and then normal bow, and see how what you did with the waves is helping you create a richer and richer sound. You know, every time you go for that long bow, get deeper into the string, right? Get right onto the edge of what's possible. That crossed the threshold a little. Or backwards, down bow with the waves. So after about 10 minutes of this, your head should be spinning, your ears should be ringing, you should be consulting a hearing specialist because you probably will never have made that much sound before. At least that was the case for me. After I really started practicing this, I felt like Oistrakh all of a sudden. Like, wow, I can make so much sound, so much sound. I have access, I have this range. And I have to remind myself of that periodically. Like I still do these exercises. It's a fantastic warm-up. It even helps with all sorts of articulations. Like all that stuff is dependent on the sensitivity of your index finger and your hand, that it's loose but kind of strong. And the waves really do sensitize you. And I find it to be a very good warm-up. Okay, so yeah, we have a couple of comments here. Paul, who's a luthier, says, I love that. Explore the limits. Yeah, I assume you're a violin maker. Well, I think violin makers are also exploring the limits. Like, how far can you push a piece of wood? You know, depends on the piece of wood. Carroll writes, so this is basically how to play the wave, which is portato l'oreille bowing. It's not quite portato. It could be. I mean, these words become very subjective. To some people, portato is exclusive, or not exclusively, but distinctly change in bow speed. You know, it's something between kind of a... Everything is kind of on a spectrum here. But this... yeah, maybe it is portato, a good portato. Yeah. If you see great violinists like Schering and Oistrakh who use this technique pretty extensively, their portato didn't go... That's something I see a lot today. A lot of violinists, and I think they're just copying each other because they often can't even explain why they do this or whether they're doing it consciously. There's actually a speeding up of the bow before the next note. That's an exaggeration. That's literally what's happening, and cellists are very guilty of this. Oh, the guilt. But notably, people who studied with either Casals or a student of Casals don't have this problem. They play legato, actually. Anyway, don't get me started. So, open strings, then we go to scales. So... sure everything's very loose. Watch the string, make sure it's happy, it's oscillating. Don't become weak all of a sudden as you get up to the higher registers of the E string. You're going to, don't be afraid because this is not a way. No, get on the bridge. Really, don't let up here. Very big problem many people have when you're in the higher registers. There just isn't that ease of sound production where you can just let all your weight in. People get afraid, and that results in less momentum in your bow stroke and less pressure. Everything is just kind of lifted out of fear. So don't be afraid. To do all this Lalo stuff and anything. To modulate the sound and to play dynamics and, have these kind of waves going up and down, you need to be very comfortable in that register, putting weight, pressure into the instrument. That relationship, it's a push and a pull. It's not a stationary thing and pressure down on it. It's a relationship. That's what the waves give us. So all the same things, 4 per bow, 6 per bow. What you can do with this is, let's say 4 per bow and then an open, and then 1 sustained bow with vibrato. So. really test the limits of the instrument. Addie says it is portato as opposed to legato playing. Yeah, you can certainly say that, but I think the technique that this is developing is crucial for legato, because legato is a sustained relationship between the string and the bow. That kind of tension on the string is sustained, and your attention to the tension. You're focused on not breaking that tension. You see that very often, bow speed changes, and this changes when you want pure legato, right? You no longer are doing the waves, obviously, but the technique you learn in the waves, this manipulation, by manipulating it, you learn also how to keep it very even. I find that it helps with all kinds of bowings, legato, portato, off the string. Addie says, playing true legato was one of the things Professor Zvi Zeitlin insisted on in Eastman. Yeah, big fan of Zvi Zeitlin. If you're not familiar with his playing, go find him on YouTube immediately. One of the great players and teachers of his time. Yes. Adi also says, I don't believe pressure should be part of the sound. We're pulling against the resistance of the string. It depends. I think the word pressure has been thrown around in the mud and developed a bad reputation. There is an objective answer here because it's physics. And there is pressure, and there has to be pressure. If there's no pressure, the only way you can get a decent sound is with a very slow bow. Otherwise, there's just no grip. As soon as you do that, you lose grip. So we do have pressure. Pressure is not a dirty word. And to learn to master pressure, we associate pressure with tension, some of us. And that's also true. There is tension. Like, this is physics. It's not subjective. But I think some of these words cause people to do bad things just because of association. And I totally agree that excessive force and grip on the stick, which is different from pressure into the string, that's a misconception and I think a confusion that some people have, and that leads you down a path of tight, kind of tense sound, which is something I think the waves can fix. Because when I'm doing this, I'm so loose and relaxed. I'm just putting as much weight and pressure as I can into the string until it cracks. And the more I put in, the looser I am. And so that's the goal, is that when you want more, you release more. It's kind of counterintuitive, as opposed to that's why I don't believe in pronation, because if I want more, it feels like this is how I'd get more, and I don't believe in that. I believe that it's more of a hanging, and the hanging is done with the finger and the wrist. That's all you need. Yeah, you're going to get all the sound you'd ever like in kind of a forte situation. Okay, so there's more discussion going on in the chat, and I'll address that a little closer to the end. So just moving on, I want to discuss this etude, which I absolutely adore, and it's from a guy named Hubert Léonard, and it's from the Belgian, Franco-Belgian school. And in that school of playing, this kind of portato, it's not actually a portato, I would call it an accented legato, because a portato kind of suggests that there's a break, and a legato suggests that there's a connection, a line. going through the phrase that you're playing. So I think you can still have that connection while having these accentuations. So it's kind of a hybrid stroke. So this etude is fun because the hardest part is the first two bars. For some reason, he writes 16 notes per bow, so 16 waves. It's kind of hard to do. I would split this. I would start this with 4. Do everything with 4. Okay, so again, I would at first try to achieve an even forte sound, but as you get better with the waves, you can start manipulating dynamics more. Like we can have waves in piano. These indentations become much lighter, obviously, but still try not to change the speed of the bow. Watch very closely what your right hand is doing. There's some funny fingerings here. This 3/4, I think it's just a misprint. So one thing I can do here is a beautiful, hopefully, hairpin. That's kind of getting more advanced with the waves. So we're not changing the horizontality. We're not adding bow speed variations. We're slowing the overall speed of the bow down and reducing pressure. You know, all these parameters. I don't want you to think of parameters ideally, right? We want this to be a feeling. So still doing waves. You know, I'm controlling the stick. That's an exaggeration of what I'm doing, but so at any moment I can push more, I can expand the sound, I can reduce it. That's what control of the hand is. Another misconception in technique, that everything has to be relaxed. I hate hearing this because it gives people the wrong idea. Granted, many people have problems with tension. I'm not immune, especially on stage. Things can get tense sometimes to an unhealthy degree. But you need to develop certain kinds of strength. Right? Strength is very important. So strength of the fingers in the right hand is when you get to higher levels of playing, you know, you've played etudes, you've played a bunch of pieces, and you feel like you're not a ball of tension, strength becomes very important. So this is teaching the kind of strength that allows you to manipulate the sound, to create the sound that's in your mind. So it has expressive function, which we'll cover in a little bit. So we can go through this. 4 notes per bow. We could add these crescendo diminuendos, you know, make a fantasy out of it, right? Make it into a piece of music that is interesting for you to play. Be improvisatory with it as well, you know? 2. Okay. And so on. Then you could graduate to 8 notes per bow. So, and I just committed a foul. I went to the frog, and we can't really do waves at the frog. So try to stop here. See how much nicer that sounds? And so on. So that is actually not easy to do. 8 notes per bow and with good sound, right? We're trying to have rich sound even with 8 notes per bow. There's a Dunas exercise, I believe, in his daily dozen that has you doing like a bunch more, 16 or 32, even more. I would have loved to hear him play that because I think it's a different exercise than waves, like something like this. There's only so many waves you could do on one bow with a rich sound. So this is the etude, and it's 2 pages. Like I said, start it slow, 4 notes per bow. Go from open strings to scales to this etude, and you can turn any number of etudes into a waves etude. So it's actually harder in many ways just because of all the string crossings. So to do all these string crossings while still maintaining the speed of the bow, if I didn't hear or see you doing this, if I didn't hear you doing this, or maybe I wasn't paying attention to your hand or the flex of the stick, it should look like you're just playing legato. There's no difference. The difference starts from here, right? Obviously. So that's maybe the most important thing to keep track of. Okay, let's move on to some musical examples, just where I think this is useful, and sometimes even useful in the sense that I would actually do waves in the interpretation, in the piece of music, right? We talked about how it's useful for just developing your control of sound, but it can actually be literally used. So the Nigun of Bloch, which if you don't know it, it's a fantastic piece of music from a suite called Baal Shem, 3 Pictures of Hasidic Life. And it starts on the G string like this. One of my favorite pieces. Now, to do that, I'm manipulating exactly the same things that I learned in the waves. And I'm even using some waves. So when you have these sudden changes in the sound, like the sound decays, and then it speaks again, how are you making that happen? And you're probably going from like a softer sound to a louder sound, different speed, different sounding point. Like you can't treat these parameters as separate things to be controlled. Won't work. So to make that shape. And the string goes wah, wah, wah. It gets very happy, very excited. So when I'm practicing that, I would experiment. There's a million ways to play that introduction. But I think what makes it very interesting is the manipulation of this resistance on the string. What's the relationship of the bow to the string? You have to engage it. As the former teacher of mine said, you have to engage the string. It's not a one-night stand. Okay, good. So Bloch, another example. Mendelssohn Concerto, second movement. I have to drive the sound in a certain way and then come off of it. Like that's what we're doing in music, right? That's how we modulate the piece of music. And it's all the principles of what's the relationship of the finger, basically, and the wrist. Again, I don't believe in these large scale motions. I don't think this is a real thing. Send me angry letters, please, everybody, but I will take that to the grave. I don't think we're doing the doorknob thing. We're doing this and this. So it's kind of a mix of that. It's faster. It's less clunky. This is a clunky motion and it causes tension. This is a springy motion. I can do things very quickly with it and release and I don't feel tight. Okay, that's Mendelssohn. So when I practice that, I would exaggerate. I think of Ivry Gitlis sometimes because he really went to the limit and often crossed it in terms of how his music spoke, how the phrase grabbed at your heart. He had a way of kind of directly accessing that. That's partly because he really went to the limit on these things, and this was a big part of it. You can hear his Bloch going. He releases so quickly and then engages immediately, right? That's a mastery of this relationship, which is a pliable one. It's two things in space leaning against each other and feeding off each other and breaking everything. Beethoven Seventh Sonata. Beethoven in particular, very often the sonatas have episodic, sort of short-lived expression. Maybe not in the second, the slow movements, although in the slow movements as well. But certainly, for example, the Seventh Sonata, there's hardly, a long stretch of bars which doesn't have a bunch of twists and turns. So piano. It's just a huge kind of inhuman sort of crescendo that he asks for there. Certainly it doesn't work well on the violin. You have to figure out how to do it. So we go from, and that has to be like a pretty huge amount of sound. It has to be so striking. So that's the relationship with the waves. I'm really looking for the limit there. I don't want to. And then. Sforzano. That's here. That's a big wave. A zhit sound. So we're going from pianissimos, I think, to fortissimos within a matter of seconds sometimes. Okay, then Rachmaninoff's piano trio, which I'm performing in a couple days. Been working on that, and I find myself practicing a lot of waves. So. So how do I make those shapes, you know? That phrase. So obviously I'm not literally doing waves there. It's kind of one big wave, but I'm using that relationship that I've mastered by, and I can again check that visually with the string. Is the string doing what my idea for the music is? Is it matched, like visually? And the string should follow that. If I want to do something slightly perverse there and really bring that ending out instead of letting it taper, that's what I would do. I'd push the bow speed. I would find that relationship that creates that sound. Okay, so that's basically it. I hope you kind of get obsessed with the waves a little bit, and of course, everyone is at a different point in their violin journey. You might have trouble with certain aspects of this, or other things might grab your attention. So obviously, without knowing all of you individually, this is kind of a general guide. Let's see, we have a bunch of action in the chat. Is it because I made controversial statements? Yeah, let's see. Paul Luthier says, needs to be enough tension on the bow hair, otherwise bottom out onto the bow stick. Yeah, that's actually another interesting point, is it gets into like how tight the bow hair should be. I don't like mine to be very tight. I think maybe a little tighter than this. But if you're playing on the stick, and this of course depends on the kind of bow you have, how flexible it is, I don't recommend ever touching the stick to the string. That means you're pressing too hard, probably. Maybe if you're going for some really extreme kind of sound, yeah, that'll probably give you some kind of flavor. But generally, we do not want to do that. So if you find yourself like, I don't have enough sound, but I'm pressing a lot and I'm already touching the wood to the string, the problem is not the pressure. The problem is you don't have enough momentum. Like I'm taking the string to the limit there. I'm definitely not touching the stick to the string. That's very important. Ishi, Daniel, how does this technique apply to Mozart concerti? Yeah, it's less, let's say, less obviously pronounced in lighter playing, just because there's less tension on the string in lighter playing. I think this exercise and the techniques that it works on permeates throughout every single thing you'll play, because everything is about the really... When you practice your Mozart concerto slowly, you're not going to be playing... I don't think that's extremely useful. There are going to be these sorts of indentations into the string. When we practice expressivity in a slow tempo, exaggeration is certainly part of that. And so you run into the waves there, I think. Addie says, when we pull something like elastic bands, there's no pressure. Again, I'm going to have to pull or push back on that. When you have an elastic band and you pull on it, that's actually a very good analogy. There is force being used. I guess pressure is not really a correct physics term. Force, which is an even dirtier word, right? Force is the actual term. We have a force that we're applying, right? There's nothing can, an elastic band can't flex unless there's a force acting on it. And it's not a mysterious force. It's a very well understood force. So we can talk about force here, which is different than forcing. So physics and terminology get, unfortunately, mixed up here. But I think we may be, Addie, talking about the same kind of thing, but using different words. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Do you like your sound? Are you achieving dynamic range in your sound? And if you are, then, it's your choice how far you go into analyzing what exactly am I doing? What are the forces at play from different angles, from different things? So it's a longer conversation, but I think you're totally correct about the analogy of the elastic band, because it's not like I'm pushing on a table. There's elasticity, right? And that is the relationship of the string and the bow. It's elasticity. Paul says, relaxed. Addie, one more comment. I have much success telling my students big sound should feel like weight lifting. Well, now who's talking about force? We lift a ton of sound from the violin, not push down into it. Lifting. Yeah, I'd have to think about that analogy, but that certainly can make sense. I like to think of pulling and pushing. I mean, this is the old French school. Pulling is a down bow, because when we go this way, the friction makes the bow want to stay there. So it's like we're pulling something. And then on the up bow, it's more like pushing something along. That's where this all comes from, because there's friction here. The hand is loose, arm starts to pull, fingers stay there. And then here they push, fingers go this way until you break static friction. So again, think this is totally different topic, but all related, obviously. this is not an active thing. It's the fingers giving way to what the bow wants to do. And what the bow wants to do is determined by this friction, the elasticity, the relationship to the string. Okay. Paul says relaxed, varied weight rather than pressure. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, there are different words for it, but there are many no's and very few yeses in this. There's many pitfalls. So it's just a matter of kind of keeping track of like relaxed weight. I think that's a very good way to put it, Paul. That more is less in a sense. The more sound I want, the more I weigh into the bow with a release rather than from above. And I think pronation implies a from above sense. You know, it makes me want to rotate everything. I don't believe in it. Addie says, I'm trying to feel the degree of resistance of the string against the bow. By pulling, we do not need more upward pressure from the thumb closer to the tip. French had a good reason for not saying down bow, but pull. Yeah, 100% agree with you. I think I just talked about that a little bit. That's exactly correct. A lot of people have trouble with kind of pain in their thumb, and that's from excessive pressure, excessive... there's something called co-contraction, which is when you have forces acting against each other and kind of, as a result, canceling out. Like you get zero from this, but you have a lot of tension, you have a lot of work happening to create it, but you get nothing. When what you want is this. You want a force to be able to complete its journey. You know, you push something and it should go that way. You pull it, it should go this way. It's very related to martial arts. So when we have too much grip, that's co-contraction. You have gripping on the bow, you're not achieving anything, right? Because the forces are canceled out. All you're left with is a sense of tension in the body. So yeah, by thinking of pushing and pulling, I also like to think left and right bow rather than up and down bow. There are all these ways we can talk around this topic. I think that's absolutely correct, Addie, and that's so crucial what you mentioned. Yeah, relaxed does not mean lax. Being relaxed means not being stiff, I think. Yeah, totally agree with you on that. Well, I think this is a good place for us to stop for today. I hope you have something to think about, have something to experiment with. Again, start slow, open strings, scales, do some variation, make sure the bow speed isn't changing when you do this exercise, and apply it to your music, right? Exaggerate what you're doing. Exaggerate, you'll find this technique helps you exaggerate your musical phrases. And that's the only way we can really arrive at something that feels true to us, is when we kind of knock into the walls here, there, and then you arrive at something like, okay, that's what it is. There's no other way. If you tiptoe your way to it, it won't be convincing. If you just if someone says do this and you just try to do that, it also won't be convincing. You have to explore it for yourself. Every musical idea, every dynamic marking. And this is one of the techniques, I think, that really helps you do that, and the principles that this technique teaches. So thank you all for joining, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.